22 Poetry Out Loud info webinar for Maryland. My name is Catherine Frost, and I'm the Arts and Education Grants Management Associate here at the Maryland State Arts Council. And today I'm joined by Chad Buterbaugh, the Senior Program Director for Tech Support. The slides and recording from this webinar will be shared later. Please mute your device until you're speaking and do not present your screen. You'll need some way to take notes during this meeting, but because everything will be shared out afterwards, don't worry if you don't capture everything during this time. We'll hold the meeting to the established time with an opportunity for additional sharing digitally. If you are new to Google Meets, here's a quick overview of its features. The main ones that I want to point out are the red phone icon. That is how you leave the meeting. If you look all the way to the left at the microphone icon, that's how you can mute and unmute yourself. If you look nearly all the way towards the right and see the text box icon, that is how you can enter things into the chat. And we'll see if everyone can access that with the next slide. I'm curious who you are, what school or organization you're representing, and if you'd like to share a poem or poet that you enjoy. I can go first. There is a poem by Lucille Clifton that I come back to often and often again. I don't know if I know the actual title, but "Won't You Celebrate With Me" is one of my favorite lines from that poem. All right, so feel free to drop that information into the chat while I go over some grounding slides for MSAC. Our equity and justice statement. The arts celebrate our state's diversity, connect our shared humanity, and transform individuals and communities. The Maryland State Arts Council and its supporting collaborators are committed to advancing and modeling equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion in all aspects of our organizations and across communities of our state. MSAC and its grantees are committed to embracing equity and non-discrimination regardless of race, religious creed, color, age, gender, expression, sexual orientation, class, language, and/or ability. Vision. The Maryland State Arts Council plays an essential role in ensuring every person has access to the transformative power of the arts, and we advance the arts in our state by providing leadership that champions creative expression, diverse programming, equitable access, lifelong learning, and the arts as a celebrated contributor to the quality of life for all the people of Maryland. In 2019 and 2020, we went through a strategic planning process that came out with 5 goals, and the 3 that connect to today's presentation most are increased participation, provide intentional support, and bolster Maryland arts. The creative meeting actions that will guide our time today are to celebrate being in the space with other creative people, engage with everyone's presence as a gift, acknowledge that together we know a lot. Enter the conversation with curiosity and inquiry. Share your idea and trust that it will be heard. Use I statements. Focus your language on the task at hand. Hold one another accountable with care. Apply yes and. I hear your idea and I'm going to add to it. And balance speaking and listening. So the flow for today, we just covered those goals and mission of MSAC. We're going to get some context for Poetry Out Loud and dive a little bit deeper into this year's structure and timeline. We'll cover an example of a video recitation and how it's scored. Then we will discuss preparing and uploading video recitations into Smart Simple. We'll cover the timeline and then have time for questions. You are welcome to add any questions that you have in the chat box, and then they will be held until that portion unless there's something super pressing. So I will take a look at who we have here and the poets that you all are excited by. And I hope you can also share in the chat how familiar you are with Poetry Out Loud by dropping your letter in the chat. Did you participate last year? Have you participated before but not last year? Or are you completely new to POL? Or maybe there's another connection that you have. So just scrolling, I see Nikki Giovanni, Elizabeth Acevedo, Solomon Sharif, Natalie Diaz, and Carson, Ross Gay, Alice Walker. And we do have some folks that are new to POL. I'm very, very happy to have you all here today. All right, so let's talk a little bit about arts and education at the Maryland State Arts Council, just in case you're also new to this organization. So the Arts and Education Department has three main branches that we support. We have the Teaching Artist Roster, the Arts and Education Grant, and Poetry Out Loud. We won't talk too much about the roster and the grant, but just to let you know what those opportunities are, the roster is a curated directory of Maryland-based teaching artists who lead a variety of arts education programs and are then eligible for grants to lead those programs at Maryland-based schools and sites. But we're here to talk about Poetry Out Loud, a national poetry recitation competition for high schoolers. So this is a program all across the country. Moving on to the next slide, that encourages the study of great poetry by offering free educational materials and a dynamic recitation competition. The lovely photo here is of the last time Maryland had this competition in person and the top three winners from the state level. Poetry Out Loud was created by the NEA and Poetry Foundation in 2005. There's a large online anthology of poems, over 1,000, I would say, and the reach of the program is very expansive. It's in every state, DC, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and American Samoa. And there are student stipends and awards that are available from the NEA as well as the Maryland State Arts Council. So if you're new and you'd like to learn more, or you've been familiar but could use a refresher, please check out poetryoutloud.org, and Chad just dropped the link to that in the chat. So for our second virtual competition in the state of Maryland, there will again be three avenues to access the competition: schools, community organizations, and independent students. Because of the pandemic and how that affected how this program is usually run, community organizations and independent students were added, whereas typically this program has been hosted by school-based educators. So whether it's a public or private school, an educator may host a classroom and school level competition for high schoolers, and then choose their top two students who will then submit videos for regionals. Similarly, a community organization can host a competition and select their top two students. But if you're an independent student, you can submit directly to regionals. You don't have to go through a competition before that point. And then briefly going over the timeline for this year, we're in the registration period. Registration will close November 15th, and more information will be shared after registration closes. The online application period that we will call regionals will be from December 3rd through January 9th. So this is a window of time where students will be able to upload their 3 recitation videos to our grants portal, Smart Simple. December 6th through December 17th, there will be coaching sessions. So if you or your students would like some support in preparing your recitations, we will have coaches that can help guide you through that and provide feedback. Then the state competition itself will happen in March. There are a few deadlines in between that point, but that will be shared with registered participants when it's applicable. And then nationals will happen in spring 2021. So whoever is announced as the state winner that first week of March will then move on to nationals in the spring, usually around May. So if you will humor me, we are going to try a scoring example so you get a sense of how the live state event occurs. Regionals is completely online. You just submit an application and it's reviewed, and then you hear back if you moved on. But during the state event, videos will be presented, judges will score, and at the end of that event, the winners will be announced. So for the next minute, we're just going to look at the text that Chad dropped the link for in the chat for Fairy Tale with Laryngitis and Resignation Letter. So after that minute is up, we will hear a recitation, and then we'll have a chance to practice scoring if you're interested. So starting the timer now. As you read, feel free to drop any words or images that stand out to you in the chat if you'd like. Yes, if you can click on the link, read the text there. And if there are any words that stand out to you, feel free to drop them in the chat if you'd like. That's our timer. The words that stood out to me: green droplets, spray of salt. And now we're going to watch a recitation of this poem.
Fairy Tale with Laryngitis and Resignation Letter by Jean Dubrow. You remember the mermaid makes a deal. Her tongue evicted from her throat, and moving is a knife cut with every step. This is what escape from water means. Dear colleagues, you write, for weeks I've been typing this letter in the bright kingdom of my imagination. Your body is a ship of pain. Pleasure is when you climb the rocks and watch the moonlight touching everywhere you want to go. A silver world called Far Away. Dear colleagues, you write, this place is a few sentences contained by the cursor's rippling barrier. What happened here is only beaks and brackets. The serif's liquid stroke. The old story has witches, a prince in love with the surging silence of women, a knife that turns the water red. You write, dear colleagues, now these years are filed in the infinite oceans of bureaucracy. Everything bleaches or fades. In other words, goodbye. Sometimes it's possible to walk. Although you've been told inside the oyster shell of your heart there is no soul. Creatures like you must end as a spray of salt. Green droplets floating breathless in the air.
All right, now we are going to practice scoring. So we'll take a look at this scoring form together so you understand how you can fill it out. And then I'll put 2 minutes on the clock. There's no right or wrong with this. This is just to get a sense of the whole experience. So the steps are just to select your name, which will be test, the round, which will also be test, and then the contestant name, Raheel Magosha, and then to score each category. So your judge name is Tech Rehearsal Tech, test round, the contestant is Raheel, and then you'll look at the different criteria like physical presence, dramatic appropriateness, voice and articulation, and the qualities associated with each score and decide, do I think that recitation was an outstanding example of physical presence or a weak example of physical presence? And you'll score all the way down, and I will put 2 minutes on the clock. This is completely optional, just if you're curious. All right. Thank you for the folks who submitted scores or just reviewed the sheet. This is to give you a sense of what the live event for the state competition that the Maryland State Arts Council will be hosting in March is like. For your school level competitions, how you manage scoring is completely up to you. You do not have to use this process of Google Forms. It's just to give you a sense of what the live event contains. All right, moving on to talk about some tips and what the Maryland State Arts Council will be providing this year. So we'll have winter rehearsal hours and coaching opportunities for our regional and state competitors, as well as supplemental materials designed by those coaches to help participants effectively prepare and practice their recitations. These are filming requirements from the NEA that I'd like to cover here and will also be shared out after registration. It's important that you film with a horizontal orientation rather than a vertical one. Looking at this photo, this is a vertical orientation. You want that nice wide horizontal orientation and to face the camera so it captures your head to mid torso, which is called a medium shot. Each recitation should be filmed in one single shot from one static angle, and it should not be edited. The sound and picture should be clear. There shouldn't be music, graphics, titles, virtual backgrounds, or computer animations. And the use of professional recording studios is prohibited. For each video submission, the recitation should have its own separate video. There should not be two poems in one video. And students must begin by stating the title of the poem and the poet's name. Any other comments like, "Hi, my name is Catherine," before or after the poem are not allowed. And poems must be recited from memory. So all of these NEA requirements can be found at poetryoutloud.org. You should definitely familiarize yourself with that site as you prepare for your school competition. So some tips. You just need a camera, and it doesn't have to be a particular type. It can be from your phone or a laptop or desktop, a digital camera or a camcorder. But you shouldn't shoot handheld. If you have books or a chair or a tripod, anything that you can rest that device on so that you're not holding it yourself and possibly shaking it. The student should be standing, and if possible, use a plugged-in microphone or have the camera as close to the student as possible so that the audio is clear. It's important that you listen to the recitation during and after recording to check for any extra sounds like air conditioning or outside noises that could affect a judge's ability to score accurately, and to make sure that you have recited the poem accurately, because that's one of the scoring criteria as well. There shouldn't be any school insignia or clues to the school's identity on the person or in the room or environment where the recording is taking place. Students may look directly into the camera or at a fixed spot or imaginary audience. There's no one way that you have to look at or address the camera. But make sure the student is the only visible and audible person in the video. It's recommended that you start recording a few seconds before the recitation and stop recording a few seconds after the end. Other tips, it's also a good idea to film yourself in front of a blank or neutral wall, not in front of a window where the light can be distracting or any backgrounds. And try to avoid wearing similar colors to whatever your background is, so you're able to stand out. The camera should not pan or zoom in the way you may see on some social media videos. It should be a static, fixed angle. And one of the benefits about this virtual competition is that if you forget a line or make a mistake, you can simply start the recitation over again, start recording over again. Some large video files can take a long time to upload on our grants portal, Smart Simple. So we encourage you to upload your videos to a personal YouTube or Vimeo page, and we'll go over some of the details for those uploads. But reminders again, no one's voice besides the student should be heard in the recording. The student must start the poem with the title and the author. No other types of introductions or comments are necessary. And each poem should be recorded separately and submitted as separate videos. Just wanted to cover those tips because we are still conducting this competition virtually. So it's a new way of leading this program as opposed to in-person requirements where you didn't have to worry about cameras and audio the same way. So for more examples of successful recitation videos, there are links on Poetry Out Loud's YouTube page. You can check those out to see what other competitors across the nation have submitted. So let's talk about Smart Simple. These instructions will be emailed as a PDF to registered participants But just to give you a preview of what's to come for the regional and state process, you're going to go to marylandarts.smartsimple.com and register if you don't already have an account. It's important to note that registration, the Google form where you are registering for Poetry Out Loud, that may be submitted by an independent student or the host for a community organization or the host for a classroom or school level competition. But once we move to the actual application period, students should have their own accounts, even if they are hosted by an organization or student. The teacher or school should not be creating the Smart Simple accounts, particularly because there are going to be two different competitors that you're submitting. So each competitor needs their own account rather than both of them being under a school account. It's also important to note when you are filling out contact information during registration in Smart Simple that there is a question about social security numbers. We're asking for this so if a competitor wins, they can be paid quickly, but it's understandable if you're not comfortable with sharing that information. If that's the case, you can put 0, and only if you are selected would you be contacted to then provide that information in order to be paid. Once you have registered in Smart Simple from your grantee home dashboard, you can select funding opportunities to locate the Poetry Out Loud application. There are some questions on that first section that are really just asking what type of participant are you. So if you're an independent student, you would select that drop down to indicate you're competing on your own, not through a school or organization. If there's a teacher that's organizing a competition and it's one of the top 2 students that's filling out this application, then they'd select school affiliated. And if you're being hosted by a community organization, then you would identify as organization affiliated. Again, these instructions will be sent after registration and shared with all competitors, but wanted to cover the poem codes. It's important that you identify the codes and eligible selections for your 3 recitations. There must be at least 1 poem written before the 20th century and 1 poem with 25 lines or fewer. But because you're uploading 3 videos, it's possible that there may be some carryover. So there are 2 types of free choices for that 3rd poem. It could be a poem that doesn't have any codes at all. It's truly a free choice. Or maybe you had a poem that already supplied P20 or 25L options as filled. So then you're selecting that one. And in these instructions, there will be an example clarifying how one poem might cover multiple categories. For video uploads, videos need to be uploaded to YouTube or some other platform with a link and follow the naming convention of your application ID with the poem title. Your name should not be in the title of the recitation. And it's important that you check the privacy settings to make sure that your video is unlisted rather than public. If it's unlisted, then only those with the link can view it. When you are creating a YouTube channel or uploading videos, you'll be asked to select the audience type. And it's important that you select not made for kids so we can live stream these videos during the state competition because of different permissions with platforms. All of this information, again, will be emailed out at the point that it's more relevant, but while we have folks on the line, I definitely wanted to cover it. So there's a question in the chat that I can answer now. Only the 2 school-wide winners create Smart Simple accounts. Yes. So if you are hosting a competition and you have 15 students that are participating, just as an example, not all 15 of those students need to create a Smart Simple account. It's only the top 2 folks that will be moving on to regionals. And then the last part of this application in Smart Simple is electronic signatures. You'll add your name as the applicant's name as a signature, and then there's also a field to certify this video. And that just means that you performed the recitations from memory. You did not read the poems while filming. You did not edit any of the videos. And when you're in Smart Simple, it's always a great recommendation to save. There are some fields that may not populate until you hit save that first time. And you can always come back later and reach out with questions for technical support if any issues arise. So before you apply, it's important that you read the scoring criteria, which again can be found at poetryoutloud.org by checking out the teachers and organizers page, which goes into judging a contest, organizing a contest, particularly if you're new to Poetry Out Loud. You should register for a Smart Simple account, and you should review the video recitation checklist. Again, this is emailed after registration closes. You'll have all of this information, but it's important that you know details like only stating the poem title and poet, not including your name or any other comments. It's important to memorize the poem accurately to make sure the poem codes are correct, that the video has a horizontal orientation, that it's a medium shot from head to mid torso, that the camera is stationary, there's no movement, that you can be seen and heard clearly, there's no objects or noises that block out sound or movement, that the video is unedited, there aren't graphics or backgrounds or music. There's only one poem recited in its entirety in a single video, that the video's uploaded to YouTube as unlisted and labeled with the application ID and poem title and listed as not made for kids, and that the poems in the application are listed in your preferred order. So the code title, author, and YouTube link under poem 1 should be the first choice. Poem 2 should be the second choice. Poem 3 should be the third choice, because you're not guaranteed for your third choice poem to be scored. Going over our timeline again, we're still in the registration period. Regionals, the online application period will be from December 3rd to January 9th. Coaching sessions will be available December 6th through December 17th. State will happen in early March 2020, and nationals will happen spring 2021. So that deadline for folks to submit their recitations, their 3 recitations, is Sunday, January 9th at 11:59 p.m. And then folks will be notified about their status of moving on to state at the end of January. And then around Valentine's Day, Sunday, February 13th at 11:59 p.m. is when that next deadline for the state competition is. But all of these dates will be shared once registration closes. About a week after registration closes is when everyone will receive more details. So next steps, register if you haven't already. Check out the teacher organizer guide and Poetry Out Loud anthology to start looking at poems that you're interested in, and be on the lookout for details about winter rehearsals if you're interested in support while you're preparing your application. And no apologies needed for these questions. So the question that I see in the chat now, are we reporting all of the scoring data for every student who participates in the school-wide competition? No. You will not have to report to me the scores of all 15 students, just to carry on with that example. If you were hosting a competition where 15 students participated, we wouldn't need to know all of the scoring data. We will need to know how many students participated, There's a final report question. So we're curious about any activities that you've led for your school level competition. Did you have three different classroom rounds and then you moved on to school? Some details like that, but we wouldn't need to know that student X scored this number in round one, this number in round two, and this number in round three. So we've covered MSAC's mission and goals, had some context for Poetry Out Loud and this year's structure and timeline, an example of scoring during a live event, covered some of the filming requirements from the NEA and tips about preparing video recitations and entering that information into Smart Simple. So now there is time for questions. And if there's not something that I'm able to answer now, then it will be answered when the slides and webinar link are shared later. Can a student who does not move on from a school competition submit their work as an individual? I will have to check on that. It feels like it might be a no, but I also don't know why that wouldn't be. I'll have to check with the contacts at the NEA about that. But at this point, I'm going to lean towards if they'd like to submit themselves, they can do that independently. But if you do have a classroom competition, that the top two folks that are identified should be the ones that move on from that particular school. But I will clarify, let's say that you're at a school and you're hosting the competition for your 11th graders, and there's a 10th grader that wants to participate that's not in your class. They could certainly independently submit themselves. It might be if you're hosting at the classroom level or the school level, and what level of contact you have with the particular student that is thinking about applying independently. Let me scroll up to see if there are other questions. You can also feel free to unmute and verbally ask your question. Scrolling back up, it seems like we have folks that are new to Poetry Out Loud, or they've participated in the past, but not necessarily last year. So if there are any questions for folks that have participated in the past, but have not participated in the virtual competition, anything that can be clarified, any questions that you all have? This year's judges should be announced in the upcoming weeks, pending approval. All right, I'm going to check the registration form very quickly to see if there are any comments from there that I could clarify for folks who have already registered. But other than that, my contact information is on the screen. So if there's a question that comes to mind after the fact, feel free to reach out. Not seeing any specific questions come through the registration forms either. So thank you all for your time today. And we will get these slides and recording to you within a week.